If you watch any American TV at all these days, you know it is hard to go more than a few minutes without seeing an ad for some online dating service. It's become a cultural phenomenon in America. A Pew study last year found that 15% of all American adults have at one point or another used an online dating site or app. That number rises to 22% among young adults aged 18 to 24. Online dating has also become a big business in the States. It is estimated to be a $2 billion industry, growing at about a 5 to 10% clip every year. And part of that growth has been the emergence of niche dating sites. You can now find online dating sites for single bikers, single gamers, singles into fitness, singles in the military. And because the Catholic Church, as Pope Paul VI famously said, we are an expert in humanity, it is no surprise that there is also a flourishing online Catholic dating scene. We're pleased to be joined today by one of the pioneers in that field, the president and CEO of CatholicSingles.com, Mark Daoust. Mark, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, John.
Oh, it's a real treat to have you. Now, listen, I know that the CatholicSingles.com kind of got to this party early. If I'm not wrong, you were founded in 1997. Is that right?
That's correct. 20 years old.
So give us the sort of genesis story of CatholicSingles.com. How did this get started?
Well, so I am actually not the original founder. I just recently took it over. The original founder, his name is David Navarez. And he was single. He was very active in his local Newman Society. And he saw the way the internet was going and realized that there was a better way to meet people, or he wanted to facilitate fellowship among singles. And so he started Catholic Singles with that purpose in mind. He ended up meeting his wife through his own site and through his own business as well. And he ran it for the past 20 years, did a great job building it and pioneering this space. And he's now moving on to different things. And he and I have been working together for 3 years now. With Catholic Singles, and I just recently took it over as the new president and CEO, and hopefully we'll bring it another 20 years down the road.
Now, I know you weren't there at the beginning, but I'm sure you know the oral tradition there at CatholicSingles.com. I'm wondering at the beginning, what kind of resistance they ran into. Because, we Catholics often are fairly tradition-minded, right?
Sure.
I mean, and particularly when it comes to your marriage, we can be a little leery about things that strike us as sort of new, unconventional or outside the box. So, can you talk a little bit about maybe some fears that had to be allayed at the beginning?
Sure. Well, I think we see this with dating sites in general, not just Catholic Singles, but there were some unique challenges with Catholic Singles, especially towards the beginning. I think people overall, there was some hesitancy to going online to find somebody, and I think there's some, frankly, some well-founded fears about that, because it turns dating into much more of an objective sort of thing. You're literally looking at classifieds for people, right? And that's
right. It's sort of like a headhunting exercise. Sort of, right?
It is, and I mean that goes against a lot of what we believe as Catholics as well, right? Because we talk so much about the dignity of the human, but yet we reduce ourselves to profiles. So I think there was certainly some hesitancy, and still is some hesitancy among Catholics with regard to that. I think the other challenge that David ran into, especially early on, was the line between ministry and business, right? And I know a lot of Catholic business owners. My brother owns Peanut Butter and Grace publishing company. I'm sure you deal with this at Crux as well. Where do you draw the line between the ministry portion, because we're all involved in this to some extent as ministry, but also the fact that we need to feed children and have a business. And, he would run into that as well. People would wonder why the service wasn't free. So that's something that we still deal with today. And I think both issues today. I think online dating is much more acceptable now, but that's really just a product of being around for 20 years and just the growth of the internet. People understand that it's a good communication tool. But the challenges are still there, for sure.
Well, on the issue of why it isn't free, you can always quote the the late American Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, former president of the Vatican Bank, who famously said, "You cannot run the church on Hail Marys alone." There also has to be a revenue stream in there someplace to support ministries, or otherwise, what are you doing? Listen, let me talk about the present and then the future. First of all, at the present, how big is CatholicSingles.com? I mean, at any given time, I'm sure you have a sense of, how many people are on the site and that kind of thing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So there's over 70,000 members on the site. Most of them are free members. We have a what's called a freemium model, so you can join for free and have limited access to certain features, but you'll be able to browse and see who's on there, fill out a profile, and everything like that. So there's over 70,000 free members, and we get about 1,500, 1,600 new members per month signing up for the site.
And is that mostly in the United States?
Almost all within the United States. We do have some international membership, but everything's really focused mainly on the U.S. David, who founded Catholic Singles, now has Catholic Solteros, which is focused on Central American countries. Yeah,
well, so since we're Americans and we love quantitative stuff, let me ask you a couple of other things. One, do you have any rough sense of how many marriages over the years have resulted from people who have met on CatholicSingles.com?
I don't. That's a great question. That's something that I would love to be able to quantify. I know that our testimonials pages run something like 6 or 7 pages deep, and it's just filled with one story after another. And an ironic story, by the way. Shortly after I took over Catholic Singles, I was going through those testimonials pages and taking a look, and I got to one of the last ones, and I thought, well, that girl looks familiar, and it ended up being the girl I dated for almost 2 years before I married my current wife. So I reached out to her and told her, I said, look at this, I just found you on this site, and I just took it over, which is pretty fun. But there have been a lot of marriages that have come through out of the site, and a lot of good relationships that have come through. I wish I had the actual number for you. Get back to me in about 8 or 9 months. We'll start to have some of those numbers.
Yeah, we'll have to do a follow-up. Other question, you because you couldn't answer that, undoubtedly you don't have this answer for CatholicSingles.com specifically, but I'm just curious, in the world of online dating generally, is there any data about how those marriages do as compared to the norm? I mean, do we know if they tend to be more stable, less stable, about average? I mean, do you have any sense of that?
The only sense I would have would be purely anecdotal, and the people that I know that have met on dating sites. And it's more and more. I mean, it's becoming more and more prevalent that people are meeting on dating sites, Catholic dating sites, whether it's Catholic Singles or Catholic Match or Ave Maria Singles. Any of these sites, and again, anecdotally speaking only, the marriages that we've seen have been no different than what you would see from other types of marriages. At the heart of the issue, and again, I think when you have a site that is trying to be genuinely Catholic and is attracting Catholic people, we're able to still get down to the foundation of what a good relationship, a good marriage would be, right? And focus on the person, a focus on the individual, and building the relationship on the person, and then some sort of faith-based level to your relationship.
Now, is part, because as you said, I mean, all of us who work out in the field of Catholic stuff, it's one part of business and it's another part of ministry. On the ministry end of things, after people have connected with each other on the site, and things seem to be moving along well, and they're considering marriage, are there resources that you make available to them, or direct people to other resources for things like, pre-marriage prep, that kind of thing? I mean, is that something you see as part of the role of CatholicSingles.com, or is it more that your end of things sort of concludes when the match is made, and then after that it's up to the normal resources of the church to sort of carry things through?
No, I think we're expanding into that area of really trying to support people, whether they're still single or they're in that dating relationship and maybe gearing towards marriage. So we are building up our resources on those issues, things that people in dating relationships should be looking for. So we've been gearing up our resources primarily through our blog, and I can see adding more features in the future to help supplement that. I think one of the things that we're trying to do over the next year is to really take a sense for supporting the vocations of single Catholics. Right, it's that they're a large portion of the church, and there's very few resources for a lot of these people. There's lots of resources for people who are married, right? Being a married person myself, I know that. I know that there's a lot of support and a lot of information out there. For somebody who is single and still looking for that vocation, or maybe they know their vocation is marriage, but they haven't been able to find the person to marry, that's a very, very awkward position for a lot of people within the church. So the mission and that ministry that we're really looking to build up, that portion of the site that we're trying to build up, would be to support those people all the way up to the point of marriage, whether they're not in a relationship or in a relationship, and being able to give them the tools and the teachings of the church and the wisdom of the church to help them form better relationships. There's so much bad information that we have into ourselves from culture about dating. I mean, the very idea of dating is a fairly recent concept. We published a blog post recently on whether or not divorced Catholics should enter the dating scene. And I tasked one of my writers to do this, and she came back and said, it's a difficult question because the church really, this is such a new concept. Dating is such a new concept. It's only about 100 years old, right? That we've really been dating like we are now. So the church doesn't have anything definitive on this yet, but here's what there is out there. That's a really long-winded answer to your question, but in terms of that ministry, the goal that we are trying to build and the resources we're trying to build and the site that we're trying to build now is something to gear and cater towards singles, no matter where they're at, whether they're single and not in a relationship or even in a relationship and building towards marriage.
And talk to me a little bit about the future, Mark. I mean, what do you see as the next big sort of mountains to climb for Catholic singles?
Yeah, so my opinion, and we let off with this a little bit, right, that dating websites are somewhat antithetical to the idea of the Catholic view of the human person, right? It's very weird to put yourself out there in a classified ad. And one of the things that I got from friends and business associates that outside the Catholic world, when they heard I was taking over a dating site, was, oh, you got to go the way of Tinder, right? Everyone is swiping left and swiping right. I thought, no, like that's so wrong. Like there's so much wrong about that. And I started to look at the site, and all the dating sites out there, and whether or not you're swiping right or left, as you would in like that Tinder sort of app, we still all have that sort of mentality. It's still picture and then advertise yourself. And so what we're really trying to do, and we're going to be coming out with a lot of major improvements here in the next, hopefully 8 months or so, where we start to focus more on the person themselves and have a lot more activities on the site, which will hopefully bring out the personality of people and give people ways to interact with each other that doesn't rely on just your profile picture, but really relies more on who you are as a person. And again, that the whole site is going to be geared towards that, right? Supporting each other, whether or not that's for the purpose of romance or also fellowship as well. Praying for each other, encouraging each other in single vocations, and hopefully helping everybody find the vocation that God has for them.
All right, now, Mark, my day job is I cover the Vatican. So before we let you go, let me ask you two quick Vatican questions.
I hope I know the answers.
Synod of Bishops. There's going to be a Synod of Bishops next year, precisely on vocational discernment. And a lot of the stuff we've been talking here about helping people, figure out what God is calling them to in their lives is supposed to be on the table there. Is that something you guys have your eyes on? And I mean, they now have the Synod has an online questionnaire for young Catholics who are going through vocational discernment. They're asking people to respond to. I mean, is that something you would encourage people to do? And to what extent would that be something that's kind of on your radar?
That has not been on the radar yet, but I can tell you that it will be on the radar. I was not familiar with that. So obviously, I'm encouraged to hear that we're seeing some motion there, especially from the Vatican, because I think the single vocations in the church are, I don't have hard numbers on this, but I would suspect, and I'd be interested in your opinion as well, I'm guessing that that's a very large growing portion of our church. And so there needs to be some attention for them. Absolutely.
And I suspect you're right. I don't have the hard numbers either, but I'm sure you're right. And actually, I think one of the purposes of this pre-Senate exercise is to be able to get some hard numbers. But I do think it will reflect, you're right, that the number of single people in various stages in life and moving towards perhaps various eventualities, but that is not an insignificant piece of the Catholic pie, for sure. Other question is this. Over the last year, one of the big news stories in the Catholic world has been Pope Francis's document on the family of Amoris Laetitia. And in particular, most of the news interest has focused on the question of access to communion for divorced and civilly remarried people. Now that of course is sort of on the other end of the spectrum for where you work, right? I mean, that's about what happens when marriages break down, where you're more in the business of trying to help happy marriages come together in the first place. But, I'm just wondering, among the people who have come on the site, people you talk to, has Amoris Laetitia been a topic of conversation? Or is it something that you find, Catholic singles who are trying to figure out, if they're called to marriage, and if so, with whom? Is it something they've asked you about? Have you provided some resources on that? Is this something that has been on your radar?
That has been, and if you take a look at the demographics of dating sites and Catholic singles in particular, you obviously the first thing we think of is usually young people, right? We think about people at that marrying age, maybe 25 to 35 years old. But there's a very large portion of members on these sites that have been through a marriage before. And whether it's annulled or divorced, they're on the site, which is why we actually had that article recently published on whether or not divorced Catholics should even enter into the dating scene. Now, a lot of the people on Catholic singles who are divorced and not annulled are there really just trying to answer some pretty basic questions about what does God want next in their lives. So that document is absolutely on the radar for what we're doing, and I'm sure on a lot of our members' minds. Now, they haven't come to us and asked us about that at all, but those are areas that I think, from our perspective, knowing that there's a large portion of our members who fit that demographic, a large number of our members who are divorced and not annulled, the question is, where do they fit? And I think this is kind of the question that the church has been trying to answer. And a lot of these people have that question as well. Where do I fit in the church? Where do I fit in God's plan as well? So absolutely, it's a big question for these people to be asking, and one that we're hoping to be able to provide some resources on, and hopefully be able to provide obviously some fellowship for these people as well. The door for remarriage for someone who's divorced and not annulled obviously is not open. Fellowship is, and so how can you do that in a prudent way that leads and helps you grow in your vocation?
On the whole, Mark, did you find among that demographic that you're talking about, people who are divorced and who are contemplating what's next in their lives, on the whole, do you find that they found Amoris Laetitia encouraging, alarming? I mean, can you say anything general about what the reaction was in that community?
From our members, no, I can't, because I have not polled the community, and we have not had many people talk to us about that. I think from what we've seen outside of that, the response has been unfortunately somewhat confusing of a response, right? What does this actually mean? And depends on who you talk to as far as what does it mean.
In the news business, we found that too, a lot.
So we're not alone.
Yeah. All right. Well, in that sense, you and I are plowing the same trench, I suppose. Well, listen, this is just a fascinating sort of hybrid business and ministry that you're in. And I know you're still somewhat new to it, but it sounds to me like you've got a lot of great ideas, and it is going to be fascinating to sort of track how you guys evolve. And listen, as we cover next year's Synod, I hope we can also bring you in a couple of times just to give a kind of in-the-trenches perspective of somebody who works with these people and kind of has his finger on the pulse of what they're thinking and feeling. I hope we can call on you for that too.
Please do. I'd love to be a part of that. Absolutely.
Excellent. So that was Mark Daoust, the President, CEO, Grand Poobah of CatholicSingles.com. Mark, where do we find you online?
You can find us at CatholicSingles.com, or you can email me directly at mark@CatholicSingles.com as well.
All right, well, there you have it. So check out the services that CatholicSingles.com provides. This is John Allen, the editor of Crux. This conversation has been part of a series of interviews with interesting movers and shakers in the Catholic world in all different stripes. So we will look forward to seeing you again soon. Until then, have a great day.